Hey guys, happy National Camera Day. My name's Kelsey J. You probably have seen me on social media as Hey Kelsey J, and I'm here today to teach you how to shoot self-portraits. But first, I think what we should do is I want to give you a little bit of background on me as a full-time freelance photographer and how I got my start, because I think it's really helpful to hear how people have become successful as photographers. So we'll start with that. I'll give you background on me. Then we are going to go over what camera gear I use to shoot all of the content you see on social media for me and for my commercial photography clients. And then we're going to go out into the field and I'm going to show you exactly how I shoot self-portraits. We're going to go over 2 different methods for shooting self-portraits. And finally, after all of that, I'm going to give you a quick look into my editing style, and we're going to edit one of the self-portraits that we're going to take out in the field today. And as we go along, if you have any questions for me, I am live here in the chat, so feel free to drop any questions and I am happy to answer. All right, so let's dive right in. A little bit about me and my background in photography. So I started taking photos when I was a kid. I think I was 10 years old when I got a point and shoot and I started taking photos. Then in high school, I took photography and I first learned film photography actually, and then moved on to digital. At the same time, I was actually signed with a modeling agency in San Francisco, which is why today I really love shooting self-portraits, because although I shoot a lot of landscapes, I want to be able to include myself in my work, just to give it a little bit of different meaning, and it puts my own unique spin on it, right? So after learning photography and modeling basics in high school, I went to college and moved to San Francisco, and I got a quote-unquote real job, a 9-to-5 desk job. And honestly, I just needed to find a way to meet friends in San Francisco. So I got a camera again and I started going to photography meetups in the city, and I started to meet these creatives, these freelance photographers that were doing this for a living, and I thought that was incredible. So I started going on trips on the weekends. I started adventuring to Yosemite, to the Redwoods, down Highway 1, and I was taking photos constantly, and I spent all of my time after work relearning how to edit photos. And then I started posting them on Instagram, and eventually I started gaining a little bit of a following. Brands started to reach out and notice, and I just got up the courage and I decided to quit my job to try to do this full time. And what was really helpful too is I worked at PR firms for almost 5 years. And I was doing influencer marketing work, which means that I already had an idea of how it worked behind the scenes in terms of quote unquote influencers, if you go to Instagram, TikTok, that kind of route, how they were getting paid, how those campaigns worked. I already had some insider knowledge on that. So it gave me even more confidence that I was like, okay, this is something I want to do. And I just really, really, really wanted to be able to travel full time and take photos full time, the 2 things I love the most. So I quit my job. I had 37,000 followers at the time. I left my apartment and I sold almost all of my belongings, and I lived out of a carry-on suitcase for about a year, traveling full-time, taking photos. That is when I started getting to work with some incredible brands around the world as I traveled, and my Instagram following really took off. I hit 100,000 followers that year, and after that, the sky was the limit, and I just knew I wanted to do this full-time for as long as I could. So now today, I have my own place in Seattle. I moved to Seattle, Washington for the great outdoors. I get to hike here all the time. I travel now for work all the time, and I am very, very excited to also be a Canon creator, talking to you guys and teaching you how I do all of this. And I also do commercial photography work too. So lots of stuff going on, but it has been incredible so far. My biggest piece of advice, and if you learned anything from my story here, is that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You see people do really well on social media, online, and you think maybe they had some shortcuts to get there, or they just blew up overnight, or had one viral thing happen. But I can tell you right here, right now, that my career was literally my entire life in the making. Like, I started taking photos when I was 10. So wherever you are at with your career, don't get discouraged, and know that we are in this for the long game, because we want this to be a lifelong career, right? Not just an overnight success. So wherever you're at, just keep on going, keep practicing, take a photo every day, edit a photo every day that you can, and you're gonna get to where you wanna go. Okay, so that's my story, but let's move on into the camera gear I use. All right, so let's talk camera gear. I'm gonna show you guys my entire setup and how I use each lens and why. So first off, let's talk about the camera bodies. I use the Canon EOS R6. I love this camera primarily for travel. Like that is why I have this camera, is for travel and self-portraits. The body is so small and so light. It's perfect for packing when I'm packing for a trip in my camera bag. And along with that, it has this amazing screen. This is so convenient for shooting self-portraits. It is a full frame 20 megapixel camera. It shoots 4K video, so I can shoot video when I'm on the road with this too. So I've absolutely loved using this camera so far. It also has like really fast autofocus, incredible autofocus, which is also super, super important when you are shooting self-portraits. So yeah, that's why I shoot with this camera. I would absolutely recommend it, and I'm gonna keep shooting with it for as long as I can. Moving on to lenses, the lens you see on this camera right now is a 24-70 2.8. I have this on you right now because it is the lens that I use the most in my work. I use it for commercial photography gigs. I use it a lot when taking photos out in nature, out on trips. I use this constantly. So this lens is absolutely my workhorse. I would definitely recommend it. And it is definitely the lens that I use the most. Now moving on, prime lenses are also amazing. The quality of a prime lens is so sharp. You get incredible bokeh. It has great focus. Like I love prime lenses. So this is the 35 millimeter 1.8. I love using this lens for portraits. A lot of portrait photographers prefer 50 millimeter. I think for me, since I like to shoot a little wider and outside and I want to be able to show a little bit of the background of my subject, I prefer 35 millimeter for portraits. And along with that, I also use this a lot for product photography for my clients. So definitely a very useful lens. Moving on, this is Canon's 15 to 35 millimeter. So essentially it is a wide angle lens. And I cannot tell you how useful this can be when you're out shooting, both for two different ways, indoors and outdoors. When I am indoors shooting a hotel, an accommodation, a cabin, whatever it is, you really want a wide angle lens to be able to see more of the interior and see more of the scene. So this comes super handy for that. And when you're outside, like I can't tell you how many times I've been at a waterfall and I need to be able to see the whole waterfall in the frame. Or I've been in the redwoods, super tall trees, and I want to be able to see as much of the tree. That is when I use a wide angle, so it is really important to have as well. And finally, we have the Canon 70 to 200 2.8 aperture. This is a telephoto lens, so you maybe know this already, but it's really great for when you're trying to shoot something that's far away from you, so whether it's wildlife or a scene that you're not quite close to. And it's also good for compression. So when you compress an image, it sometimes makes things look taller, right? So if you want to make mountains look really big or a certain thing look really big in the background of your landscape, that is what this is great for too. It's also great for shooting layers in landscape photography. But I also love using this when I'm shooting editorial work. When I want to shoot photos that look like they're in a fashion magazine, I also use this to shoot subjects, including myself, including other people. I think it's not used enough in that sense because, back from my modeling days, most of the high fashion photographers I've worked with that were really successful would actually shoot their models and their subjects on a telephoto lens. So although it is usually used for landscapes, I cannot recommend it enough in other scenarios, and I would definitely try it out and see what feel you like for your images and if this is right for you. So yeah, this is my full kit. These are the lenses I use. Of course, when you're starting out, I understand that it might be hard to buy a bunch of lenses at once, and that's okay. Of course, like the best gear is what you have with you, and you can absolutely make it work. This is just so you have an overall idea of the lenses that I use, what scenarios I recommend using them for. And of course, if you guys have any other gear questions, go ahead, ask me in the comments now in the Q&A. I'm happy to answer. You can always message me too. I am happy to answer any gear questions you may have. Okay, so now we're gonna go out in the field out here in Washington, and I'm gonna show you how I shoot self-portraits when I'm on the road. One of the number one questions I get asked by you guys is, how do I take photos that I'm in when I'm traveling if I don't have another photographer with me, if I don't have another friend with me? And so it's really, really important to be able to shoot self-portraits if you want to be on camera. It's going to give you so much more flexibility and freedom to be able to take your own photos too when you want to. So I'm really excited to show you how I shoot self-portraits. All right, let's head out. Okay guys, so we are out here in the fields. We're at a beautiful pond here in Washington, not too far from Seattle, and we're gonna take some self-portraits. I'm gonna show you how it's done. Yes, I brought the EOS R6 with me. I think to start, I'm gonna use the 24-70 just because with the pond, I wanna use a little bit of compression. And I found a spot we're gonna do it. We're gonna set up the tripod and I'm gonna show you how to take self-portraits. Okay, so we're gonna set up the tripod. Here we go. Got the camera. Okay, so I think for the first shot, I'm gonna be kind of further away and I want you to be able to see the lake behind me, but I still want to pop out away from the lake. So I usually like shooting for those kind of shots with like a little bit of compression. So that's why I'm using the 24-70. Right now I'm at like ISO 250, 5.6 since I'm pretty far away as an aperture. And shutter, we'll drop it a little bit and I'll up the ISO a little bit just so we can, since I might be walking or something, we want to have a pretty decent shutter speed, so I'm at 250. So one other thing I want to check before I start shooting is I want to check my histogram to make sure that I'm exposing the image properly. So I'm going to press info, and then your histogram meter shows up right here. So what's going to happen is if you're blowing out the highlights, then you're going to get this, and this meter is going to go way too high, versus if you blow out the shadows, then it's going to start clipping on this end here. So we want to make sure that you're getting all the information possible and you're not losing any highlights or shadows for later. So because of that, I'm actually going to underexpose the image just a slight amount so that I'm not clipping the highlights. So it'll look a little dark on screen, but it's going to edit a lot better. So to start shooting self-portraits, you're going to want to use your interval timer. So you're going to go into the menu, you're going to go to the first camera menu, go to number 6, and then you'll see interval timer. We're going to hit this to enable it. And then this is when you get to decide how many frames it's going to shoot and how fast. So when I'm shooting, I think it's really important to capture a little in-between moments so you seem less posed, and I want to have a lot of different options. So we're going to go into info, and the number of seconds, I'm going to drop that down to, let's say, like 3 seconds. And then with shots, I wanted to shoot a ton until I come back to the camera. So we are going to put this up to like, you know what, let's just do 40, okay? Just especially like if you're really far away and you don't want to keep coming back to check it, I always like to do a lot. Then you are going to exit out of your menu. And then when you press the shutter, it's going to start shooting for you. A couple of really quick posing tips for when you are taking self-portraits. For a shot like this, we can do some more traditional portraits later, but for these more like adventure shots where the landscape is also part of the subject, I still think it's really important to show some sort of movement and to keep switching up your poses, even just a little bit, where it doesn't have to be super dramatic, just so you have some options in terms of images that you want to use. So one good rule of thumb is that you should always be moving a little bit every time you hear the shutter click, or just keep moving around and keep doing your thing. And then eventually one of the photos is going to turn out good. One thing I hear a lot from people online is that it can be kind of scary to take self-portraits in public when you know people are watching, but honestly, you're probably never going to see these people ever again. So whatever you want to do, go get your shot. It's going to be great. Okay, so let's go take a couple and I'll show you how it's done. Okay, so I'm putting the focus, should be right center. There we go, it's right center there. So I'm going to start right in the middle where I put the focus, and we'll see how it goes. Shooting the timer. All right, that's it. Let's see how we did. Okay, so now we're just gonna go back and review the images, and you'll see every single image I tried to do a slightly different pose, so I have options. But normally when I shoot self-portraits, I'll come back, I'll see what I liked, what I didn't like. You also always want to check the focus, which it looks like it's super sharp, it's spot on. This camera's really good with focus for these.
So basically I just see what it looks like. I see if I got the shot I wanted, and then I'll just shoot it until it's good. And that's kind of how I shoot travel photos on the road. So that is the simplest way to shoot a self-portrait, and that's what I like to use when we're doing those more far away from the camera, standing in beautiful nature kind of shots. That's definitely the way I go. But I want to show you guys how I also shoot more traditional self-portraits. So we're talking close up and personal here. And so we're going to switch lenses. If you guys remember from earlier, my absolute favorite portrait lens is the 35. So I'm going to switch over to a prime lens, and I'm going to show you a different method for shooting self-portraits completely differently. Okay, so we switched over to the 35mm prime 1.8 aperture. That is my favorite portrait lens. And I switched it to portrait orientation, which is really good for close-up portraits, of course, meaning it's just vertical, you know. So we're going to go ahead and try a different method for shooting this time around. So the other option we can do is use the Canon Camera Connect app, which works with any Canon camera. So all you have to do is, if this is your first time doing it, you can use the easy connection guide, and you're going to use Bluetooth to connect your camera to the Canon Connect app. And now we can use this as a remote shutter release without having to buy a separate remote shutter. Okay, so once you have your camera connected, which it'll walk you through, it only takes a couple minutes, then you're going to click Remote Live View Shooting. So now it's just waiting, it's going to connect, it's searching for the camera. All right, then we're going to join the network with the camera that we have. All right, and there we go. So here you can see I have an entire live view of what my camera is seeing right now. And from the app, I'll also flip it this way for you guys, you can also change your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. So you can completely change your exposure, and you can tap to get the autofocus properly. So what you can do is when you're in front of the camera, if it's out of frame, you can be controlling your shutter while you're also posing for the photo, which can be super, super useful. There we go. I'll lift this up, because if you're as tall as me, you gotta get the camera height. Okay. We're gonna go back to the app. Let's do it. And it pulls right back up. So I can check the exposure and stuff. I already set it up. When I shoot portraits, I'm already gonna shoot at 1.8. A low aperture is gonna get that really nice crisp, but kind of like perfect focus, a very specific focus for your image. So we already set this up. So now I can even see what I look like, you know, you get ready. And I'm going to bring it down here, and you can just tap to focus on the screen. So I'm going to tap to focus. And then when I want to take the photo, all I have to do is press the shutter releaser button on my phone, which will be out of frame anyways. So let's give it a shot. Then I can always tap to focus if I move again, so the camera can pull the new focus. And that's about it, you guys. Okay. I think you can, oh, and then you can also preview your photos on your phone, which is really nice. So then you don't necessarily have to go to the back of the camera. And you can check focus as well, or you can see them on your camera. And you can see when you use a prime, you get that really nice bokeh effect behind the portrait, which is why I'm shooting at such a low aperture too. Then you can also check focus, and it's looking really, really sharp. So that's it. That's how you take a self-portrait using the Canon Connect app. Okay, so we shot our self-portraits, and now we're gonna head back to the studio, and I'm gonna show you how I would edit these portraits. So you guys are gonna get the full creative process. Let's go.
All right, so we are back in the studio. I have uploaded the photos from our little self-portrait shoot, and I'm going to show you how I would edit a specific image. So let's dive on in. Okay guys, hello. We are at my computer screen, going to show you how I would edit these images. Okay, so I just picked, we're gonna do two. I just picked a more like travel where I'm just standing out there taking in the view. We're gonna edit one of these, and then I will show you how I would also edit more of like a true portrait. Okay, cool. So let's just take this one for example. Of course, I'm gonna up the exposure. Remember, we shot it at a little bit of a lower exposure because we didn't want to lose the highlights. So now I'm just fixing this horizon line here so that the lake looks perfectly straight with the horizon. Boom. We did a little crop like that. Then I'm going to drop the highlights so that I get more of the detail back in the mountains and those clouds up there, right? Awesome. I might take up the shadows a little bit. Let's see. Actually, let's drop the exposure a little bit so I have more room to play with that. I'm going to up the shadows a little bit as well. Okay, and then I personally like to declarity a little bit, just like 5 to 10, just to give it more of like a whimsical feel to the photo, if you will. Okay, the next what I'll do is I'll work on this tone curve. So I do a decent amount of fade on my photos, like just a little bit. And then the classic S curve is always a good choice. I've noticed it does really well with Canon files. So I did a bit of this, and then I'm gonna come back up to my basic controls, do a little more contrast. I'm gonna drop the blacks down a little bit more, up the exposure. Amazing. Then I'm going to use a graduated filter, this ground, which I would clean up this little more, like I'd take away all these spots and stuff. But you know what? The ground's not that cute. It's a little muddy, so I'm going to drop the exposure on that, which is also going to pull the eye upwards to the subject, which in this case is me and the view. So we're going to drop that a little bit. Next up, we're going to go to our HSL sliders. So something I always do, because I am a redhead, is I'll usually mess with my oranges a little bit. I love upping the saturation of oranges. With greens, I might even change the tone of that a little bit and desat it a little bit. I love blues. I love to make them a little more on the turquoise side. And again, it's also on my sweater, so you're gonna have to play around with that a little bit. And I do a bit with the split toning, the shadows and the highlights. I think for this one, because it isn't a true portrait, I probably wouldn't mess with this right here. And then I actually love using camera calibration. I think camera calibration isn't used enough. I love the blue primary slide. I usually slide that over to the left just a little bit, just to give it a difference. It does make the hair almost a little too red or too like different orange, so I probably might move that a little bit back. And then I just try all the different camera calibrations, see what I feel like, see what I like here. This is just kind of like a basic idea of what I want to do with them. Something else I'm noticing with this photo is it's very cool because it was kind of dark and shadowy out when we took this, so I might also mess with the white balance. Let's see, that gives it a little more color. Maybe brighten that up a little bit too. And then it seems like the hue is maybe a little green, so I'm just gonna move this over here. Cool, so you get a basic idea. Then because the subject is still a little dark, I still don't think I pop out well, I'm going to use this to select myself, and I'm gonna brighten myself up a bit. It's important not to do it too much because you don't want it to look too fake or too much like you're popping out. But see, that helps so much just to pop me out a little bit from the background. And you know what? For an image like this, I might even just crop out some of the ground because it's just area that we don't need. Something like that. What I might also do is the hair, I think it's not exactly how I want it. So I'm selecting the hair with a brush tool and I'm dropping down that exposure a little bit so it looks more just realistic. And then I'm going to up the saturation a little bit so that is what pops in the frame. So sorry to anyone that's a ginger out there. I'm sure you can do this with any hair color. And yeah, this is about it. This is about what I would do for a base edit.
Of course, then I would clean up the image a little more. Like you can always clean up, you know, spots and other things you don't like about it, something like that. But yeah, this is a really big, actually, you know what? Let's contrast it a little bit just to make it pop a little bit more, maybe about there. But yeah, this is a pretty simple base edit to a more landscape-oriented self-portrait, right? Because I'm out standing there. This is really about the scene that I am experiencing in the image. So this is one way that I would edit this photo. Okay, so let's take a look at a more true portrait. So I'm going to take up this exposure here. I'm going to fix that horizon line again. I'm going to make sure the subject, is centered. So we've got that. The hardest part with this is going to be because we shot it when the sun was already starting to go down. The hardest part is going to be the skin tones and getting that color back into the image. So here's an idea of it. Once again, I up the exposure and I'm dropping the highlights to get back more of the detail in the clouds behind me. And I'm probably going to up the shadows a little bit too. And I'll probably, maybe just a baby bit of declarity. So we're here. I'm going to play with, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to warm up the image just a little bit just to try to get a little more color into my skin. And play with the white balance a little bit. And then I'm going to do a very similar tone curve as last time. I love to have a little bit of fade, especially with portraits. I think it's just a little more dynamic and just, you know, brings out the photo a little bit more. Maybe drop the blacks a little bit, maybe up a little contrast. Pretty simple stuff though, right? Like nothing crazy. I think it's still looking a little dark maybe. So let's up that exposure. Let's drop those whites again, just so I'm not completely blown out like that. Amazing. So we already have this. We're going to go back to the hue sliders, mess around with that a little bit. You know, all of the above. And then with skin tones, this is when we're really going to have to mess around about the hue sliders. So let's see. If I up the oranges, not only does it help my hair, but I'm starting to get a little more color in my face. And now what I'm doing here is I'm changing the luminance level of my oranges specifically. So that really helps bring back some of this and you get a little more color. I'm going to drop that a little bit as well. And usually lips are a little bit, yeah, so my skin tone is a little bit red, right? So this is going to change based on your skin tone because I realize, once again, not all of you are ginger, but you're going to really want to pay attention to this because you want skin tones to look like they really are in real life, right? So here I'm upping the saturation of my reds and I might even make them slide them a little bit more to the orange. So there, you get a little more on my face. Let's check a little bit of the yellows too, but there's not too much yellow in it. And then I might even drop this a little bit too. Boom. So you're getting a little more color at least in my skin tone and in my skin. But I don't want to go too much. I think you want to make sure that you're not going too oversaturated so that it doesn't look natural as well. So that's about it with the color grading. Then what I might try is I love changing my shadows. So let's go into here, into the color grading. So there's two different ways I do this. In a cool image, I might change this to about 215, 220 to my hue. Or I can also try making it warmer. And if I make it warmer, I usually keep it around, my hue around like 30, 25. So what I do is I up the saturation to see what it's going to look like. And obviously I'm not going to keep it this way. But just so I can see. So if I make it warmer, if I make it cooler, I kind of have an idea. And I think because this image is already so cool and I want to bring back a little more life to the image of my skin tones, we're going to stick to the warmer side. So I'm getting an idea of the hue I want. Let's keep it, we'll keep it around like 30 right now. And then I'm going to bring the saturation back. And then I'm going to up it a little bit in my image. There we go. And that's going to give it a little more life to it, you know? Like that's without it. Up it a little bit and boom, like it just brings that warmth to the image that the white balance couldn't even do because it's just in the shadows, which is so important for an image like this that was shot in darker lighting where you didn't have a lot illuminating to get the color out of it. So that's what I would do there. I'm not even going to mess with shadows or anything like that. Usually I do use a little bit of the vignette for a portrait if you want to like bring in once again the view to the center of the image, which is the subject, which is me. So you might want to mess around with that a little bit. I do personally love adding some extra grain to my portraits, but that is totally up to you. That is not, just a personal preference. And once again, yeah, like let's check out the camera calibration. I actually really like dropping this to make so the blue's a little different and the orange is a little different. I love that kind of idea. And changing the greens a little bit. So I love that. I think the only other thing is it's still looking a little dark. So I'm upping, we don't want to lose that though. So what I might even do is I might select me, the subject, very quickly this time. And let's get it just straight onto me, or the middle of me. And even this, I might try to up the exposure just a little bit, just so you can I really pop out of the image a little more. And I'm just messing around with this a little bit just so it still looks really natural. And I might even warm it up a little bit. All right, so there you have it. That is an idea of how I would edit a portrait. So I hope this was useful to you guys and that you learned a little bit about editing today too. Okay guys, well that is all I have for you today. I really hope that you learned something new today about photography, about self-portraits, about my journey as a photographer, about camera gear. Once again, any other questions you might have, you can always reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram, on other social platforms as Hey Kelsey J. And it's been a really great talking to you guys today. Happy National Camera Day.